variegata. Both of them are, classic lilies in the, lilies in the, in our wetlands and swampy areas, but, they're always being pollinated by something. When I'm out kayaking, absolutely fabulous to watch all the bees, the pollinators wiggle around and get as much as they can. Did it press hard enough? Come on. Let's try that. Oh, for crying out loud. Hang on. Okay. Yep, there we go. Turtlehead is Chelone glabra. This is really a cool plant. Blooms later in the year, and I do have this in my yard. I actually created a rain garden. So when it rains, fills up, the plant's happy. When it dries, the plant is still happy. It's adapted to that environment. This gets only pollinated by a bumblebee, because a bumblebee is the strongest. It's the only thing strong enough to like pry these little petals open and get down in there. So any of our tiny pollinators, they're just not going to be able to get down in there. So the bumblebee is the only bee that's able to really pry those flowers open and get down in there. So if you've got kind of a damp area, this plant works really well. And if it dries up, it's completely fine, as it's adapted to those habitats. And like I said, it's in my rain garden. Some years it rains, some years it doesn't. It still does absolutely fine. Two of my favorites, cardinal flower and blue lobelia. Both of these are lobelia species. These are both in my rain garden. When it rains, they're fine. When it doesn't rain, they're absolutely fine. I will say that cardinal flower, which I did not know this until just a few years ago, I'm like, why am I not getting blooms? So you actually have to divide cardinal flower every year. So it keeps creating like this mass, and it keeps kind of moving out. But if you break those apart, plant those, you'll consistently get flowers. So this year I need to do some dividing. One of my favorite spring wetland plants, marsh marigold, should be out probably, we've been a little chilly down here, but it should be coming out pretty soon. And again, it's one of those early bloomers. Pollinators are all over it. I absolutely love this plant. There is a look-alike, so to speak. It's called Ficaria verna, or lesser celandine. And those of us down here in kind of the mid-Michigan and West Michigan, lesser celandine has become a real problem. It's typically found along rivers and streams. It's spread by as water will rise, rivers will rise, spring melt. It scours up these little tiny bulbs, and that floats down the river, deposits, and takes over. So it's these yellow flowers, but they're more star-shaped than what marsh marigold is. And we're really starting to see a big problem where it's covering, and I mean covering, these bottomland areas. So in fact, when this symposium is over, I am headed to campus to spray it, see if we can knock it back out of our natural areas. But all three of these are, like I said, cardinal flower, blue lobelia, excellent in your yards if it's got a wet area. Cardinal flower will definitely attract hummingbirds, and they absolutely love it in my yard. They'll also feed on blue lobelia. So even though it's not red, it's still it's a 1-2 punch. Other swampy wetland plants, swamp milkweed, of course, it's a milkweed. So it's for the monarchs. I actually love this. I love swamp milkweed. I also love the butterfly weed. I will not plant common milkweed. As much as I love it, I won't put common milkweed in. It tends to run, and it can be very difficult to get out of your yards if you do put it in. In urban yards, I will not plant it, even though people say, well, I want it. I can't put it in because unfortunately, if it takes over, you'll never get rid of it. Swamp milkweed and butterfly weed, they play nice with each other. So those will always go in. Pickerel weed, Potundaria cordata, another great, you got to have more of a wetland to put this guy in. But again, it's perfect for wetland areas. It attracts pollinators, and all these plants I love. I'm always going to say I love. Well, it's true, but pickerel weed, if you've got kind of a damp, swampy area that stays more, keeps water, it's a good one to put in, and is a great edge plant. Well, another favorite, this is sort of the big one for spring. When I start to see skunk cabbage popping up, I know that it's starting to get warm, and skunk cabbage actually blooms extremely early. There could still be snow on the ground because skunk cabbage actually creates its own heat. And that heat melts the snow around it, warms it up. So there'll be literally circles of bare ground around skunk cabbage flowers. And it's a stinky flower. So it means it's pollinated by flies. But again, when you start to see this, I start to get excited because I know that we've made it through winter and spring will be on its way. And then once it's done and it really gets warm, then we see the leaves come out. And there's nothing that makes me happier than seeing all that light green in a swampy area of all those skunk cabbage leaves. Now, here's some various woodland flowers and of course, Michigan has so many habitats of woodlands. Snow trillium is a very small trillium, maybe about 2 inches, and that's about it. It is in the UP. I've not seen it up there, but I have seen it down here in mid-Michigan. And the sad thing is that I just saw this about 3 weeks ago over near Portland, Michigan, at the Portland State Game area. And beautiful patch of this. However, it was down by the Grand River's edge of the river, and what was all around it? That wonderful, evil lesser celandine. So I think we're going to be hopefully doing some, monitoring with Michigan Natural Features Inventory so that we don't lose this, our smallest trillium. It blooms when it's still snow on the ground, and it was, but absolutely wonderful small plant. Of course, our big common Trillium grandiflorum, big leaves, big flowers, not quite out here yet. It's budded, but not quite. And you can definitely get Trillium bulbs to put in the ground. There's a few nurseries that are doing it. They're awful. Trilliums, a lot of our spring ephemerals are kind of tough because, it's tiny seed. You've got to be able to collect that seed. But again, to have this in your yard, especially if you've got a woodland landscape, to me, that just means happy spring. A couple other Trillium species, nodding Trillium and red Trillium. We've got these in the Beale Botanical Garden at Michigan State University. So I get to see these every spring. They're not quite out yet, but by next week, these guys should be out. But wonderful Trillium species. I've seen both of these actually in the wild as well in Michigan. But I'm able to get really good photographs in the Beale Garden because they're like right there, and so am I. Three of my favorite spring ephemerals. Bloodroot. It's just started to open down here. Hepatica and Spring Beauty. All three of these have finally popped open. They're great for those early emergent bees. Spring Beauty actually has a specific tiny little pollinator bee that is specific to Spring Beauty, which I was so happy to see last week. I was out doing some garlic mustard pulls in our natural areas on campus, and it was still pretty chilly. So, but by the time I finished, it had warmed up because it got up to 80 degrees a week ago, and all the spring beauties just popped. And as I sat down to watch, I could see all those little pollinators, those little tiny bees coming to the spring beauty. They were all over it, which just, I'll tell you what, when you hear Heather Holmes speak, she's been an inspiration to my pollinator world. And I carry her new little booklet with me, and I read up on things so I kind of know what to look for when I'm out. And when I saw those little bees all over that spring beauty, I knew what I had found. But all wonderful spring ephemerals. They're providing a food source for those emerging bees. And spring ephemerals, they come up, they do their flowering, they get their seed production going, they pull things back down into their root system, and they're done. All before all the leaves pop out on the trees above and shade out the entire forest floor. So these guys are masters at, they're masters at getting it done early and giving us something to look at. And like I said, spring is coming. Trout lily, another beautiful spring ephemeral. This one is just starting to open down here. It's more opening in, if it's close to a tree trunk, that's where it's opening because it's just a little bit warmer. But it's starting to, I'm starting to see a lot of buds right now. I just saw quite a few yesterday when I was on my walk in the Beal Garden. Somebody is actually doing a study on the color of the anthers. And I think this person might be in either Wisconsin or Minnesota, but they're trying to just get a gathering of, is there super mottled leaves? Are the anthers yellow pollen or more of that brownish pollen? And so, so that you can look that up, and it might still be running. I'm not sure, but regardless, it is such a beautiful spring ephemeral. Couple more of my little favorites. Squirrel corn, which is Dicentra canadensis. Looks like, to me, it looks like corn. The other one is Dutchman's breeches. So both of these are buzz-pollinated. And that means it's all about the bumblebee queens, because the queen bumblebees overwinter. And when they emerge, they need to find pollen. They need to find a food source as quick as they can. So Dutchman's breeches and squirrel corn come out early. However, it's called buzz pollination. And I've watched this, it's fascinating. The queen bee kind of grabs onto that flower and she vibrates her body, which releases the pollen, and she gathers that pollen, sticks it in her pollen sacs, and then then there's also pollen on her when she keeps moving around. And so she pollinates the flowers, but also gathers pollen for herself. It really is amazing to watch. Another spring ephemeral, wild geranium. I don't have this one in my yard, but it is in some of my, the yards of my clients. I love this plant. It's such a, it's not blooming yet. It's more kind of a later spring bloomer. But the leaves are all up, absolutely wonderful pollinating plant. They're, as soon as that one comes, most of the bees will be out, but really good in the woodlands. So it'll, it adds that beautiful color in the woodlands, and it does play well with others. So that's another good thing. It won't take over. Blue cohosh, tiny, small flowers, but again, our native insects use it. So, but absolutely love these little tiny flowers. Wild ginger makes a great ground cover. And I've used this in various shady situations of a few clients that we've put this in. I think that flower is just amazing. It is not pollinated by bees, but they believe it is pollinated by ants. So it's attracting ants because the flower is so close to the ground. So the ants crawl in there and they're wiggling around, carrying the pollen from one flower to the next. But again, if you need a good ground cover, this is your plant. It is absolutely wonderful. Jack in the pulpit, I just, such a cool plant. Prefers kind of that moist woods a little bit. Wild blue phlox is, a woodland phlox, has a long corolla. So I have seen some of the hawk moths, native hummingbird moths actually pollinate this. Michigan lily, absolutely a stunning plant, very tall. I've tried to grow this. It doesn't seem to like my yard so much. I'm not sure why, but I'm going to try it again. As it's kind of a statement plant. So this could have, this could be kind of it, close to your house. If you've got a small yard, put the taller plants closer to your house, the shorter plants closer to the sidewalk, so that you have that, you give visual view of everything. But again, absolutely wonderful plant. I just got to try to see why it doesn't like my yard, but I'm willing to try again. And it's gonna be a little slow. Okay, it froze up a second. Let's see. There we go. Let's try. There we go. Harebell, Campanula rotundifolia. If you have rocky substrates, this will grow on very little soil. I have actually seen this growing up near Marquette on the Black Rocks, where there's not a lot of soil, but it's doing absolutely fine. I saw this on Mackinac Island last fall, tucked in, limestone, just hanging out. So if you've got some rocky substrate, this is perfect. It's a small plant, doesn't get very big, but absolutely just beautiful flower. Also, I should talk about a few shrubs here and there. Meadowsweet, Spirea alba, lots of pollen, lots of nectar. A great shrub, doesn't get super large. You can always trim shrubs back and reform them. Don't worry about, they don't have to get 10 feet tall. You can keep them maintained. So yes, meadowsweet is an excellent shrub. I did put this in one of my clients' yards, put a couple of them in to create a nice floral barrier, and it's done so well in the full sun. Okay, now a few northern Michigan wildflowers that I only see if I get north. Fringe polygala, I just love this little thing. It's tiny, but it looks like an orchid, but it's not. It's in the Polygaceae family. And, I get so excited when I get up north and I get to see this. Dwarf lake iris, Iris lacustris, tiny iris. We do have it in the Beale Garden. We actually have an endangered, threatened plant area, and this one is in there and does well every single year. So it's always wonderful to see our dwarf lake iris, which I do believe is our state native flower, if I'm getting that right. But again, it tends to be found northern Michigan along the lakeshore. That's where it's typically found. But nice, tiny little, small little iris, but doesn't spread. It's really nice because it's small, and our larger irises tend to kind of creep a little bit faster, but this guy doesn't seem to move as fast. So, but again, threatened species because it prefers those coastline areas of northern Michigan. So we're doing everything we can to save this little guy. Indian paintbrush, Castanea, coccinea. You can see it in the red form or the yellow form. That is actually not the flower, but the bracts. So the bracts are what is colorful, which is kind of cool. And I usually see this, likes those northern, that northern region, sandier soils. I've seen other species out west on, more of that rocky type soil. But again, I wish I could get this one in my yard because it's all about that red and yellow. but I haven't seen anybody, nobody down here is growing it, but maybe someday. A couple other ones from up north, starflower, Trientalis borealis, borealis being the key word, found in the boreal zone up north. Bunchberry, Cornus canadensis. It is a dogwood, so has those four white bracts. Again, the flowers are actually in the center. So just like our flowering dogwood, same thing. The white are the bracts, not the flowers. The flowers are on the inside. It's all those little tiny flowers in there. I really enjoy bunchberry. It's one of those early bloomers. Columbine, do see it down here. I also tend to see it a lot more up north, but does well in gardens. Make sure you have space for it because it is a seeder. It will seed all over the place. So if you don't care about the seeding, completely fine. But I've had to remove a few of these from urban yards just because they're small and they'll take over. But I do love columbine, and so do the hummingbirds. They absolutely love columbine. So one thing you can do is after they bloom is to just cut the seed heads off, and then you won't have columbine seeds popping up all over the place. All right, blue bead lily, again, Clintonia borealis, only found up north. And one of my favorites. I am an orchid fanatic. I love orchids. It's one of my favorite plant families, be it tropical or temperate. We have quite a few, I think we have about 20 species of orchids in Michigan alone. Each one of them in a very unique habitat. Yellow lady slippers, so these Cypripediums, and we also have the pink lady slipper, which that'll be next. But you can kind of see the opening in the flower. So the insects crawl in the opening, and it's almost a trap. So they lure them in to where the sweet, like a sweet substance back there, and they're pollinated extremely well by bumblebees. So the bumblebees get in there, and they're forced to take this, they're forced to take a different path to get out of the flower. And in doing so, they rub up against the pollen, and then they finally exit, and then they go to the next flower. So they kind of have, a lot of orchids have trickery into attracting pollinators. So this one, there's like a sweet substance smell that attracts all the bees in. Some of the tropical orchids resemble a female bee. So the males try to copulate with it, and they're gathering the pollen before they move on to the next one. So they do have a remarkable trickery involved in how they get pollinated. Our pink lady slipper, Cypripedium aucale. This one's more in the woodlands, where the yellow lady slipper tends to be more of those wetland areas. But pink lady slipper prefers the dry upland areas, especially under conifers. That's where it likes to be. Again, I love my orchids, and I try to get as many photos as I can of each and every one. And I am in awe of this family of flowers. Some other incredible orchids are the Calypso orchid and the Ram's Head orchid. I had an opportunity to see these. It was actually the Michigan Botanical Club. We had our spring foray up in St. Ignace, either in St. Ignace or Marquette. It's one of the two, but we did one of the walks, one of the trips for our spring foray was all on orchids. Oh my gosh, I'm a kid in a candy shop when it comes to these guys, and just amazing. And again, they all have these, interesting ways of attracting their pollinators and forcing those pollinators to either crawl into the orchid itself and wiggle around, or they have, as you can see in the Calypso orchid, you can kind of see the striping And that's a cue for bees to flow in through there. And as they land in there, they're picking up pollen, and then they move on to the next orchid. We have some tiny ones too. This is the heart-leaved tway blade orchid. It's tiny. It is so small. You know, one of the leaders put their hand next to it. That's how tiny those little orchids are. Striped coral root tends to be it grows on dead material. So I think it's like tree roots that are decaying. That's where you tend to find it. In fact, this one, it was hysterical because we're slowly driving along a dirt road, and I picked that puppy out in a heartbeat. I said to my wife, "Stop the car!" And there was my striped coral root. So spent a little time photographing that one. Okay, you might have some dry areas, and a lot of these plants are going to be super for those dry, sunny areas. Butterfly weed, as I mentioned, great for our monarch butterflies. But did you know that Asclepias tuberosa butterfly weed actually does not have the latex? So if the monarch lays its egg, caterpillar emerges, eats, starts nibbling on those leaves, it doesn't get that latex that makes them taste bad. So, but it's always a cue, because if a bird is tried to eat another monarch caterpillar, and of course it isn't, it starts to ingest it and it spits it back out because it tastes bad, it's still going to remember what that monarch caterpillar looks like. So it will leave it alone on butterfly milkweed. And as I mentioned, this one does very well in the landscape. It doesn't spread, has just one main taproot, but it doesn't send out those little rhizomes that pop up somewhere else. Another low growing plant would be prickly pear cactus. I've put this in yards. Needs to be sunny, needs to be dry. And again, it's a cactus. So you got to watch out for the little tiny spines, which can be, not so pleasant to pick out of your hands, even if you have gloves on. But look at the anthers in that thing. The bees just go crazy when this blooms in yards of my client. And it is, and everybody that walks by say, "Is that really a cactus?" I said, "It is a cactus." We actually have a native cactus that actually does very well in Michigan. And the normal range of this, I have seen it up in Newaygo County, and it was all over in this dry sand prairie. So it's pretty spectacular to actually see it in its native habitat. Sand coreopsis, Coreopsis lanceolata. You want a low grow. It gets up to about 2 feet, but the pollinators. This one is a shoe-in for attracting pollinators for most of the summer. Bee balm, I love the mints. Bee balm doesn't spread. You think, there's definitely mints that spread. My bee balm has not spread whatsoever. I do have to pluck a few seedlings out here and there, but stays, it's not like spearmint that just runs. Bee balm tends to stay put. I've had hummingbirds feed out of this one, and of course, all the other pollinators and butterflies absolutely love it. I just love this plant. Both of these are in my yard. Prairie dock, hands down, of the Silphium species, we have 4 Silphium species in Michigan. Prairie dock is my favorite. Look at those leaves. My leaves, they're about 2 feet long and almost a foot wide. But again, what's the tall part? This plant will get up to 10 feet tall, but it's the flower stalk that does. So I have this one as one of my statement plants in my yard, and it's close to the house because it does get tall. It just gets tall, but it needs a little support as well. So I have this one closer to my house, it's closer up to the house. And I actually wound up putting in, I think, 2 more last year because I just love it. The goldfinches have a field day with it when the seeds are ready, and as do all of the bees that are always all over the flowers. It is just wonderful. But again, you want a statement plant in your landscape, it is definitely this guy. Another mint, horse mint, Monarda punctata, does not spread, but loves, prefers it dry. So if it's, if you've got a dry area, this is another one. Rudbeckia hirta, black-eyed Susan, excuse me. This is more of a biannual, so it needs to seed for you to have more. I do enjoy this. I've got a few in my yard, not a whole lot of them. They're doing their thing. If they seed, totally fine. If they don't, I'm not worried. Purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, another, fabulous coneflower. It tends to, for some reason, get a little floppy, so it kind of flops over a little bit. I do have the horse mint and the purple coneflower in my yard, as both of them. So when you're landscaping, if you're going to put in native plants, always try to have plants that bloom in the spring all the way through until the frost hits, so that all the pollinators and butterflies have something to feed on before they either migrate, or some butterflies hibernate actually. And so always try to have something all year long for our pollinators. Another coneflower is pale purple coneflower, Echinacea pallida. I really like this one. I don't know why. I just like the unique, where it kind of droops down. So I have this one. I have a few more of this one than the regular purple coneflower. I love this coneflower. Nodding onion, pollinator magnet. As you can tell, I've got there's a couple bumblebees that are hanging on here. This one blooms maybe late, kind of in July, mid to late July. It's a short plant. It's only about maybe 1.5 feet tall that the flower stalks are. I have this close to the sidewalk since it's a low grower. And oh my gosh, I get, our solitary wasps, they're always on these. And our native pollinators, they want nothing to do with us. They're just doing what they need to do. And that's collect pollen or sting insect, caterpillars, and raise their next brood. That's what they're all about. They don't really care about us. So I'm kind of teaching people that walk by, they get, they're like, oh, you've got too many bees. Like, they're not going to bother anybody. They're just doing their thing. So it's all about education. So we just need to educate people that, the bees that sting are really the wasps, the paper wasps, the yellow jackets. They're just nasty. So, but our native pollinators, they're like, whatever. They're all good. Common milkweed, I toss this in because if you do have if you have space that, hey, I don't care, it is excellent. It really is. It attracts those monarchs. And here's a study that's been going on. If you have common milkweed, say in mid-June to late June, you want to cut that milkweed in half, but cut it above where the leaves pop out, because you're going to get 2 little sprouts coming off of those axils. When monarchs are looking to lay their eggs, they're looking for tender leaves, because those will have less of the latex, which the young emerging caterpillars simply can't just nail into the leaf that they're on. They have to be very careful because it will kill them. So they'll start to nibble out a vein, and they'll nibble out a tiny vein, which it stops that latex from flowing into the rest of that leaf, and then they'll eat their way up that vein. So therefore, if you've got fresh leaves on common milkweed, that's better for the caterpillars. And actually, there's been Dr. Doug Landis at Michigan State University in entomology. His group has been doing this and it works. So they'll half cut a milkweed in late June, and then they'll cut another milkweed maybe next to it in late July. So you'll get those, because we're going to get a couple generations of monarchs. So there's going to be those new leaves for the monarch caterpillars. Gray-headed coneflower, absolutely love this one. Blooms later, kind of around August. Excellent food source for a lot of our little birds. I tend to get lots of goldfinches, and usually just the goldfinches hit this one. Pussy toes, Antineria neglecta, has become one of my favorite ground covers. Blooms early. It's starting to put up its little flower stalks right now, and creates a great ground cover. Only about maybe 2 inches high, but oh, does so well. And it does, it creeps, but you can always remove some of that. So if you're thinking, well, it's creeping a little too much, just go in there and snip some out. Not a big deal, but gets these wonderful little flowers, and they get all fuzzy. But yeah, I really like the Antineria species. Prairie smoke. So the one on the bottom is the flower, and mine are just about to bloom. It really not much of a bloom, but it is buzz-pollinated by queen bumblebees. So this plant emerges early, as do the queens. When they find it, when it's warm enough, they'll come out. They hold on to that flower, they vibrate their body, releasing the pollen, and they gather the pollen. Prairie smoke comes from the photo above. Those are the seed heads, and it looks like smoke. I just love this plant. I want to get to Drummond Island one of these days, because apparently that's one place you can it's just incredible. So one of these days I will get there. Ironweed, Veronia mazurica, an excellent kind of a late fall bloomer, which is great for pollinators as well. It does get tall. It can get up to 6 feet tall. So if you've got a small yard, put it towards the back. Wants it full sun. All the pollinators love it. Even the butterflies love it. And I will sit and watch the goldfinches pluck out the seeds of that one. I originally had this one in my yard, but it seeds like crazy. So that one went to somebody else's yard that they had a larger piece of property, and it's happy there. It just took over a little too much in my yard. Like I said, it's been trial and error for the last 5 years, but I've got it now down to a science. I love the penstemons. So Penstemon digitalis and Penstemon hirsutus. Both of these, the hirsutus is a little bit shorter, so he's up close to the sidewalk, but profuse bloomer. Foxglove beard tongue is a little bit taller, so he's towards the back a little bit. But oh my gosh, watching all the small native bees go in this, it's wonderful. New England aster, Symphyiotrichum novae anglia, here's a trick with that one, because this can get pretty tall. In late June, early July, I cut my plant in half, which produces more flowers and a shorter stature aster. And it's a little bit more manageable. So otherwise, he tends to get tall and flop. Therefore, I will hack it back, and sometimes I cut it more than half, because apparently I have really good soil and it grows pretty tall, and it rebounds so fast after I cut it. So I usually go a little bit more than half.
Carolyn, this is Jill. Can you hear me? We are getting ready for, it's already 9:51, and our next talk is going to start in about 9 minutes. So we've had one question come in on the chat, and that was about the lobelias. Are the lobelias the only hummingbird pollinated plant found in wetlands that you know of?
Oh boy. You know, the thing is that hummingbirds will definitely use other plant material. I have seen them try to nectar on my echinacea, my purple coneflower. So they'll search around. But boy, in a wetland, there might be other plant material. I do know that, you know, that red lobelia stands out like a sore thumb. So they definitely hit that one for sure.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that color really pops. I love it when you're walking through a wooded wetland and a beam of sunlight comes in and hits those things, and it's like somebody plugged them in.
You can't miss it.
Yeah, it does whap you upside the head. All right, well, you want to like wrap up in a minute, and then we can give, I guess you can keep going if you want to, but people can also take a break if they need to use the bathroom or get a cup of coffee or something like that. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm just going to throw a few bog and fen plants in.
Of course.
Oh yes, because I can't leave that without.
No.
Is a carnivorous plant. Actually, it has these little tiny bladders under the surface. It snags little things that walk by. Northern bog violet, that is definitely up in the UP. That's where I saw this one. Grass pink orchid, another wonderful orchid. This one's pretty common in bogs and fens, so you should be able to see it. Of course, there's pitcher plants, another carnivorous plant. Ladies' tresses, a wonderful spiranthes. I'm not sure which one this one is, but it's an orchid. Bog laurel, bog rosemary, both found, you know, northern Michigan. I don't see them too much down here. They like the more northern. Rose begonia, another orchid. And of course, our sundews, another carnivorous plant that wraps its little sticky arms around insects that crawl into it. Both of these I have found, you know, we do have some of these down here, down this way, but also up, you know, up north. Butterworts, pinguicula has these really sticky leaves that things crawl on and get stuck. Bog buckbean, this is absolutely beautiful, gorgeous flower that comes out. And Brooks lobelia, another lobelia, but very, very dainty and tiny compared to our other two lobelias. And ending with one of my favorites, hopefully I can get this one in my yard someday, fringed gentian. You know, I drop whatever I'm carrying just to photograph this. And this is my front yard. So as you can see, all the short guys are in the front. That's prairie phlox, that pink that's blooming. Towards the back, you see the yellow. That is the Coreopsis lanceolata. In front of that, you can kind of see a light pink. That is that Penstemon hirsutus. And there's also Penstemon digitalis, which is on the other side of the yellow. But this is probably around early June-ish. So I forgot to I was trying to find one where everything's in bloom, but I couldn't find that one. And thank you.